a little dependent on the patient. You know, if they're having tremendous gut distress, I'm probably starting in the gut first. So if they are having like massive diarrhea and constipation and bloating, maybe some blood in their stool, we're probably going to start in that area because it's just the one that's screaming the loudest, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know, if they're not sleeping, if they're getting massive migraines, if they're getting that numbness, that tingly thing that you've talked through, that weakness somewhere, we're probably starting with the liver and just trying to, again, get their body to start to exit some of this stuff and rev up those detoxification pathways.
Episode 31, and today we're joined with Dr. Jacqueline Berens. She is a holistic practitioner from the Wellness Way, which is based in Colorado in the United States. In today's episode, we discuss varying degrees of environmental toxicity and how it can affect the body. We go into toxic mold and the variety of symptoms that can cause and different examples that Jacqueline has seen over the years, including one in particular, which is infertility. We discuss heavy metals, diet, lifestyle, preventative measures. We go into quite a lot in this interview, so I hope that you enjoy. Please like and share and subscribe if you're interested in the information. It just spreads the message, and I think people like Jacqueline, they will only become more popular as times move on and people become more open-minded to the alternative medical space, and I really hope that you enjoy the information in the show. So Jacqueline, thank you for joining me today.
So nice to be with you.
Yes, I actually come across you guys on TikTok and commented on one of your videos, so I'm glad that you picked that up and we could finally get you on for an interview. The topic that caught my attention actually from your post was mold. So I've interviewed somebody else, a mold expert, a while ago, and it's a subject that I've really looked into myself. And I've had some issues in the past as well. So I was quite interested in sort of getting your view and rundown of your experience and understanding of mold and how toxic it can be with the spores and the mycotoxins, and also to delve a little bit into the fertility side, which is what sort of grabbed my interest in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate the opportunity to educate, because very similar to what you've dealt with, like there isn't a lot of great info out there. So it's so important that we put the information out there, because oftentimes with mold, patients are very, very struggling and in these weird set of symptoms that they are not getting answers for. So for those of you that don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Jacqueline Berens. I run the Wellness Way Centennial in the South Denver area in Colorado in the US, but we have patients all across the US as well as internationally. And our big thing is that we solve health issues that others can't. So we do that through individualized testing, through creating an individualized plan for every single patient. Because when you think about it and you look through your neighborhood, even if there are multiple homes that are built the same, they all are individual. And so if you try to just slap a protocol onto somebody, you're never going to get the results that you're after. So that's truly what makes the difference with us, is those clinical results, because we really look at each person one-on-one to create that path and that plan. And especially with dealing something like mold, that is vital to get the results that we're after. So yeah, I'll just kind of launch right into it. So mold is something that we see very, very often. I would say it is, whether you're here in Colorado, which you would think would be dry climate, we do see it here. We definitely see it in more humid climates, obviously very similar to England as well. But truly, it doesn't necessarily matter your external environment. Things happen that allow mold to grow. So it could be a water leak in a home. It could be, moldy floorboards in a car. I've had that for one of my patients.
Oh, wow.
It could be, like a leaky shower. It could be a full actual house leak. So one of my most severe cases that I've worked through, they had a second floor leak on their home, and it went through the entire 2 stories worth of windows. They literally had to have the entire back of their house basically completely remediated. Yeah, just devastating to her and her family. So really, whether you think it's something quote unquote simple or more complex, the key is understanding how it's affecting the individual. Because just like anything else out in the environment, the mold, the mycotoxins, those spores, they're a trigger. And some people struggle more with that than others. So this is where it starts to get down to, how do you process things? How good is your body at detoxing? What is your overall, toxic load over time? We start to look at all these factors because, you can have 2, for example, family members in the same house, in the same environment, and their individual health struggles are very different from one another. So it truly is a very individual thing, where you could have somebody really, really tremendously struggling with this and somebody that is looking okay, but as you test them, they've got all the warning signs that, again, they're going to struggle with their health. But in the moment, you've only got like one individual struggling, like a husband versus a wife. So that's something, again, once we start to identify these factors, that we really, really want to understand, how is this individually affecting each person? Does that make sense?
So when you have a client, are you sort of initially going through, a certain series of questions, and then you'll run the tests, including like a mycotoxin test, and then you start looking at mold? Or have you seen so much over the years that, after a few questions about their environment, you're seeing triggers and thinking, right, mold, because they call it the great mimicker, right? And
Correct.
the chances are, if you're not living in a moldy home now, you probably have at some point in your life. So is it something that's kind of always on your mind when you're assessing patients?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always there. Part of our initial intake as docs in my clinic and all the Wellness Way clinics is a big online questionnaire. So if I start seeing a bunch of yeses in those questions, as I also do a new patient consult, that is a full hour. And I mean, I go all the way back. Like I tell patients, if I don't really get to know your entire health history from birth to now, I'm going to miss something. So again, yes, those are always things we're considering, whether it's at the front end of care that we might need to be really concentrated on those things, or towards the back end. Maybe it's just some minor cleanups because they did live in a home 20 years ago, but maybe there's still little stuff hanging around that we do need to clean up for them.
Yeah, I found in my personal research that people would have all sorts of symptoms and other illnesses, and mold tends to be like at the bottom of the pyramid that allows for all of these other things to become problematic. So even if you're looking at like psychological aspects with stress, and I know that stress and I don't know, I'd say trauma can cause physical issues in the body. And then you delve deeper and it's like, they have high level of mycotoxins, which has maybe created a situation where their central nervous system is overstimulated, for instance, and or if they have gut issues, but at the core is this issue that they had all these years ago with mold. So it seems to be probably, I mean, I'm not a practicing clinician, but it seems to be, from my perspective, when I talk to people, when I research, it seems to kind of always be there at the sort of core level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say it's a super common, what I like to call trigger, like into other issues, where it's going to domino out into other systems. That looks different for every person, but yeah, absolutely. I have a gal that she was having massive panic attacks. I mean, she literally couldn't function, had to stop work until they figured all this out. And she had every scan, every test, every evaluation, and they were just telling her it was all in her head. And she felt crazy, literally, from these mold spores circulating in her body.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think one of the problems is, unless somebody has looked into your work or others like you, or even open-minded enough to look into the kind of holistic space, they could chase their tail for years or even
Oh,
decades and
years.
never
Yeah.
really get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I always say mold, I feel like, is one of the most devastating things that I see, because oftentimes I'm not their, first, second, third, fourth practitioner. I mean, I'm like 10th on the list, where they've tried to go through the system of trying to figure everything out. And it's failed them because they don't fit the mold of what's off. They're, for this one gal, she didn't have a brain tumor. That's what she felt like. She knew something was off, but everything was negative on the medical side that they were running. They weren't getting any positives on any type of testing.
Wow. If she wasn't to have found you in your work, I mean, how low could this person have gone? Would it have continued? Can it be a killer, or is it just for the rest of your life you're just going to decline and get worse and suffer?
It is definitely a killer. So there's a lot of current research linking mold exposure to certain types of cancer and cancering processes starting. So again, it basically opens the door to a lot of things that your body will start to create that is a very bad environment for long-term longevity and health.
Wow.
Yeah.
You do see, when people get out of the moldy environment, that their health tends to turn around.
Yes.
But you mentioned there an individual who, could have lived in a house for 20 years ago with mold. I think there is, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's an element of the spores actually colonizing in the body, and it can actually stay in the body, wreaking havoc even when you're out of the environment. I guess from this point, you're turning off the tap of the toxic exposure, increasing. But I'd imagine that there's an element of, if it's in you, you need to figure out how to get it out of you.
100%. Yeah. So first and foremost, our first goal, especially if it's a fresh exposure, is to figure out where, where is this coming from? Is it in your current environment anywhere? So that's the first goal, because if we don't remove them out of that or figure out where that exposure is coming from, I can do all the things under the sun, but if they just keep toxifying on a daily basis, I mean, it's a losing battle. So that's really, truly step one. Step two then is whether it's a current exposure that now they're going to leave the environment, or it's something older like what we're chatting through. It's understanding where is their levels at then today of what's left in their body. So that's running a mycotoxin profile, really looking at, okay, well, what's the load that we're actually currently dealing with that we need to then work on detoxing out. The other thing that we always really need to look at too is what's their liver up to, what are their detoxification pathways up to, because if they're not ready to handle that exiting, it's going to be a miserable experience, and they're going to not process things the way that they need to. So then you're like poking a bee's nest for no reason, because they're not ready to handle the detox.
If their detox pathways aren't up to the standards that you'd want them to be, but they're in a situation where maybe their body's trying to detox, or they've already started something on their own, maybe taking glutathione or whatever it is that peptides or whatever it is they do.
Mm-hmm.
When you say, they might not have a good time with it, what are you seeing? Are you seeing people having specific symptoms that arise when they're going through that process?
Yeah, typically if they're either not ready or they're kind of overloading those pathways whatever their symptoms are tend to flare up and get worse. So, for example, that one gal, she might have worse anxiety and panic attacks all of a sudden again. I've seen patients bloat up, so extremely bloated in the gut, massive diarrhea, massive headaches, migraines, eye issues. Eye issues are extremely common with mold, whether that's like double vision or all of a sudden your vision starts declining really rapidly out of nowhere. So I've seen a lot of different things. Sleep, it can definitely be affected as well. So some insomnia. So basically, if you're trying all these things and things are getting worse, it's time to kind of take a step back and just evaluate, okay, maybe we need to spend a little time helping these pathways to rebuild so that they're ready to handle everything that needs to get out.
Okay. What sort of symptoms are you seeing? I know there's probably a list as long as your arm, but what's the kind of more typical things that you see that would make you suspect that somebody has an illness, a mold caused illness?
Yeah. So most commonly, I would say there is definitely a hormonal component for men and women. So for women, if their cycles are super erratic, if they're super irregular, if they are losing multiple pregnancies due to miscarriage, all of a sudden, if they're menopausal aged and they start going through kind of all those menopausal symptoms again, getting hot flashes all of a sudden, night sweats, all those things. For men, if they are just gaining weight and they're bottomed out, so they lose their drive, their energy. Hormones are messengers in the body. So if you're losing those messengers, you got to figure out why. So I would say hormones that aren't returning and you're constantly declining, that's a huge red flag. I would say neurological symptoms are also very, very common. So whether that is a lot of pain, a lot of inflammation in joints, especially. I've had, again, more on the brain side, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of panic attacks, definitely headaches and migraines and eye changes. So again, all those involve the neurological system. More recently, I had a patient who was recently diagnosed with ALS, so a massive neurological issue, and just out of nowhere, just out of the blue. So if things are kind of coming really hard and heavy at a patient and we're getting all these loads of diagnoses out of nowhere, autoimmune as well is very, very common. So again, some type of autoimmune condition just out of nowhere starting. Those are huge signs that we could be dealing with a really heavy load like mold.
Wow. The person that was diagnosed with ALS, if it is solely mold related, would you believe that that could be salvageable? It could be reversible, or is the damage almost kind of done now and all we can do is manage the symptoms?
That's a great question. I mean, this is something that I sat with him and his wife through. We're still pretty early on into care. So I tell them, we know we're going to get improvement, but I can't ever promise how much. We're definitely going to turn the corner. Things are going to get better. We're probably never going back 100% because he is older and he's had mold exposure in their home for 30 plus years. So absolutely, they had no idea when they started opening up walls, just massive, massive mold exposure for years.
Is that a leak, or do they know what caused it?
They think it was the builder. So there's several homes in their area now that they've found this, that everyone's having massive health issues. It's all the same builder. And they found that there's a gap in the walls of how they built. And so that gap with the airflow allowed the mold to grow. So it was definitely a builder grade issue. Now they are in a humid climate because they're in the state of Washington. So again, a lot of humidity, a lot of moisture, but certainly that didn't help anything.
Lord. So he's quite a bit older, 30 plus years of exposure.
Yep.
I mean, did he have warning signs on the way, and maybe just kind of, you know what a lot of men are like? I don't want to generalize,
Yes.
but get on with it.
He
Go to
did.
the doctor if my toe's falling off, but other than that, I'm just going to crack on with it. I'm
Yeah.
guessing that there was a load of warning signs that maybe he's ignored over the years.
Yeah. What's interesting though is like I would say for the most part he is unique in the fact he had good habits, you know. They raised their kids, they were very active, they were always involved in, you know, athletics and sports and, you know, fitness and eating pretty well, you know. So I think it was one of those things where he had these signs and for him it would be like all of a sudden his leg would go numb and weak, and initially it started in his feet, and you know went to the chiropractor, did some massage, did some physical therapy, and it kind of went away, and he kept brushing it off for years, and then it all of a sudden ballooned up into this current issue.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah.
I've spoken quite a lot about my issues over the last couple of years with various different experts in different fields. And I've gone down the route of the psychological stuff, like the John Sarno TMS. I don't know if you've ever looked into that, but
Yeah.
essentially like the body taking score almost. So
Yep.
stress and worry, it can cause aches and pains. I had a vaccine years ago. That's where it all started, actually, was a vaccine. I had the typhoid vaccine.
Okay.
A couple of, I think it's about a week or two later, I ended up with vertigo. Never had it in my life. So
Yeah.
5 days in bed, couldn't get out of bed.
Oh.
And then I sort of got over that. And I didn't have it again until COVID, during the COVID period. The whole stress of the lockdowns and, you
Yep.
know, they were offering the solution, but in the UK it was quite forced, and you know that was incredibly stressful. And I started to get vertigo again, and it kept happening. At this point, it was sort of every 3 or 4 months, and I'd be wiped out for a couple of days. It starts in the neck. If I turn my head like this way, it's all wobbly, and then it builds up, and then it ends up, you know, bedbound. And I started getting one of my legs was just tingly. It was like burning, and this kept happening. Anxiety through the roof, stress, all of this. Just couldn't sleep. I was getting insomnia. I was waking up at 3 a.m. every morning, and I noticed that we had a bunch of mold in our house around this time. So I was like, you know, as a man, I just wipe it and carry on. Oh, it's just a little bit, and then it would come back, and then the room started to smell a bit musty. And then I started researching on how to actually remove it properly, not bleach, you know, using like white vinegar and all of this. Removed it, and it never came back. And a couple of years later, the vertigo went from being like every 4 months to like every year and a half ish. So that really dropped down. Tingles went. And then over this winter, I found more mold in the house. This was in the bathroom. So I think what's happened is the spores are in the house. They're always floating around in the air looking for, you know, I think once you've got the spores, you need to dehumidify your house. You need to regulate the house and the airflow, because it will find a place to colonate again.
Find a new
yeah. Yeah, and I found it in the bathroom, and one day I've gone in, I ended up having a chest infection, and I cleaned it out, and this chest infection lasted 3 or 4 months. It was like nothing I've ever had. Tingles in the legs come back, the whole leg. It's actually only started to go recently because I had a company come around and fumigate the whole house, and then the vertigo come back again. So I was like, wow, you know, and this is when I've really started to go down this mold rabbit hole. Since we've done the fumigation, this company come round, they done tests and things, and the levels were bad, but not chronically bad. So there was no live mold in the house. It was just the spores in the air. Then they tested after, and the numbers are as close to zero as you can get. So the process worked. Me and the wife, since we've had it done, we have been sleeping all the time. Like dreams are like nothing I've ever experienced. Waking up feeling like, oh my God, like another night. It's just like Hollywood movies when I'm asleep. It's just insane.
Yeah.
And we've just started to come out the back end of that, actually. So I've like really seen, you know, piecing it together. And again, I'm no expert. I'm just sort of looking at the timeline. I'm really sort of looking into things. for me, it's yeah, I think I've seen how quickly it can affect the body, and the symptoms I was getting were just completely random. There was no rhyme or reason. But then as soon as we had exposure again, I've ended up with the same symptoms again.
Yeah.
So,
And a lot of times it's worse, like what you described. Like it comes on even like more aggressive and more rapidly.
yeah, wow. And I mean, why? Why does it create certain symptoms in certain people? Is it like almost their constitution? Like this is a weaker part of, certain people, I don't know, they get migraines in their families. So that individual tends to get headaches when it comes to mold, or because there's quite a bit of vertigo in my family. So
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at that. I was talking to my nan and auntie, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we always get it." I'm like,
Yeah.
"What? Never even had this
They're like,
conversation."
no one said this.
Yeah. So is it,
Yeah.
when they say about things are like genetic,
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to think they're not necessarily genetic. It's more like a genetic like weakness again in the constitution.
Yeah.
So somebody has something, it doesn't mean you will, but if you're exposed to the same level of toxins, then the likelihood is that's kind of the easier way for the body to, create these symptoms, I guess.
Yeah, I would say you're definitely handed a deck of cards, like that's your genetics. But it doesn't mean you're destined for vertigo. But again, yeah, you start picking off those cards and your body starts loading up. You definitely have those tendencies. So you
Mm.
can definitely have a tendency in a family like of vertigo, for example.
Yeah. And whether it's the mold exposure or the adjuvants that are in vaccines or
Vaccines are
pharmaceuticals.
so common to struggle with. So I'm not surprised to hear that at all.
Yeah.
Same thing with a vaccine. There are certain things you need to titrate and to detox out. And if you're struggling to get those things out, it stays in your system. And you're, of course, going to have some type of response to that.
Yeah. So do you think this is almost like filling up a glass of water, and you might have the childhood vaccines, they fill up a certain amount. Food you've been exposed to and eating and cooking on frying pans that are broken, and materials that wouldn't be so friendly, and smoking, for instance, and then living in mold, and it's just like building up and building up. And then
Yep.
once you hit a point, and this is probably why people have to come to someone like you, because they don't know where it starts or ends. It's just like it just kind of happened, but I've got years of doing all these things and I was fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I always say I like to call it a bucket of stuff, you have
Yeah.
so much room. And unfortunately, too, in this day and age, if you're a parent and you get pregnant, you're passing a certain amount to your kids. Like the state of your health and your, cleaned up body or not cleaned up body, like you're definitely going to pass things to them. And that's why, too, I feel like at this point, I am seeing younger and younger and younger patients with more and more severe issues. And I think it's just because they already have like this whole load of things that are affecting them from a very young age, unfortunately.
Wow. So
Yeah.
from your parents, you don't just get their, like, again, using the word constitution. So if
Mm-hmm.
they're depleted in certain minerals, then, or vitamins, then there's probably a chance you will be. But then if your mum lived in a moldy house 4 years before you were born and
Yep.
didn't know how to remove the toxins from her body, it then ends up in the breast milk and going in through the
Everything.
placenta and.
Yep. Yeah. And
uh,
I always tell moms, and I'm a mom myself, like, don't feel guilty, like, know better, do better. But like, that's always a consideration when I have a couple in front of me. I'm like, let's get you guys as cleaned up as we can, because your health you do pass to your kids. So in this day and age, when we know infertility is on the rise, like, let's try to give your kids the best chance they can by having your health solid first.
yeah. Do you think the whole thing with infertility, so I'd imagine that there's an aspect of, if you're, say, malnourished, if you don't have the right vitamins or minerals, you can't grow a baby, right? If you don't have enough for yourself. or at least enough, to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're living in a toxic environment. Would you assume that maybe you're not getting pregnant because you're not healthy enough to get pregnant? Like, would you say maybe that's the first place to start when it comes to, because there's a lot of unexplained infertility and it is on the rise as well?
Yeah, I mean, I see it all the time in the clinic. I would say infertility is massively on the rise, and most of it, if not close to all of it, is quote unquote unexplained. So they don't have reasons why. They just automatically want to like pop over to IVF, which again is extremely expensive. And if your body is not ready to take on the pregnancy, it won't. It's actually a protective mechanism. Your body doesn't want to create a baby and life and support that process for 9 months if it knows itself is too much to take care of. So I always tell my moms, like, that's a protective mechanism. If your body's not in a place to get pregnant, it doesn't want to, and it's by design.
Wow. So if you had somebody that was infertile, say a woman, let's say in particular, what would be your first thing that you would look at? Would it be like looking at their deficiencies, or would you go straight to the toxins, or how do you kind of go through that process?
Yeah. So infertility can have any number of triggers. Kind of getting more at the mold side of things. I really want to hear their history, where have they lived? What are their biggest health issues? Most of the time as we go through infertility, usually there's cycling issues involved, whether that's very irregular cycles, painful cycles, cycles just not happening, being skipped. I want to know their history, again, of things like birth control. Birth control can absolutely impact your fertility. So I want to know stuff like that. And then from there, I'm always going to choose initially right out of the gates what I think are the most important things to test. For this one gal, we were very, very suspicious of mold. So for her, I did a mycotoxin profile. And then we also started with what's called a Dutch test, which is our comprehensive hormone profile, including cortisol levels. So I really wanted to map out all those issues to see, what's our starting place? Like, how bad are our hormones looking? What is our levels of toxins looking like? Because her cycles were all over the board. She was having crazy cycles, like 2 times in a month and then nothing for 3 months, and then she'd bleed again for 3 or 4 weeks straight and then nothing. So very, very irregular, very, very abnormal cycling.
Wow. And that did come down to mold.
It was. Mold for sure was her hands down biggest issue. For her, we figured out where it was coming from. It was unfortunately in the current home that she was in. Luckily enough for them, it was a rental. So we were able to get her out of that home, get the family into a new home. And we were able to take out all those toxins, help, again, rev up her liver pathways. We needed to do actually 2 rounds for her of detoxification. And I always say this is my favorite part when I greenlight a mom like that. I mean, we had a beautiful pregnancy established within, I think, 2 cycles for her.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in terms of the detox, I mean, are you able to, do you keep this a secret, or is there anything that you're able to kind of give us that you'd recommend people to look into?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, biggest thing is cleaning up food. Most of us know this, but we just don't take the time to do it. So I always say, like, I don't want to starve my patients during a detox. We're actually doing a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruit, a lot of everything unboxed. We really want fresh things going in. We want light, digestible proteins. So things like fish and chicken and turkey. And again, very, very heavy on the vegetable side. So we really, for 30 days, focus on clean eating, no alcohol, no caffeine, no sugar, which is hard. But your body needs that time of making digestion easier in order to let things leave. So we're doing that, and then typically I am going to pair it up with certain liquid herbal supplements. That part is always dependent on the patient, you know, trying to look at them and seeing like where they need that type of support. We might put something in like glutathione. We might put a binder in, you know, something like chlorella or activated charcoal, chlorophyll. There's all kinds of stuff we may pair in there, just kind of depending individually what they need.
Yeah. What do you think of milk thistle?
Love it. I almost always detox with it. So that's a liquid herb most of the time we're going to put a patient on, unless they have some type of ragweed allergy. There are the few you have to be a little careful with, but for the most part, that's a fantastic herb.
Yeah. Would you recommend sweating, like saunas and things like this as well?
So in our clinic, we have a sunlightened infrared sauna. So the infrared wavelengths can actually get down and penetrate a couple inches into the skin. So we can actually use that to, again, help really pull and exit things. If you don't have access to an infrared, I still love a steam sauna. That's an excellent option, as well as things like cold therapy. You know, doing a cold plunge and getting your body temp down is a way to build brown fat, which helps your metabolism. So that's like a different aspect that we can also use to help things exit.
Okay. What about if you don't have access to a red light sauna? What about a red light panel?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's all kinds of panels. I've seen even like for the saunas, infrared tents and like portable units. So there's definitely a lot of very ingenuity going on in that area to like make it more accessible, especially if you don't have like a health and wellness clinic down the road from you.
Yeah. And I guess things like exercise and moving the lymphatic system and
correct. Yeah, I want them moving. I want at least 10,000 steps a day. Massage is another great one to really like move the lymph and get things moving through the body. You know, and then water like crazy. We want them to stay hydrated as their body is trying to get things out. Yeah.
Is there, so when I was like looking into the whole fertility thing years ago, I was looking, I sort of come across the topic looking into Weston A. Price actually. And I just found it so fascinating that these people that we would call primitive in today's age, they knew that, you know, when you're looking to have a child, they knew what to do and what to eat.
Correct.
So, and looking into it in a very simple way, getting all the fat soluble vitamins, I think each vitamin or mineral kind of has a correlation with a specific toxin. So the more deficient you are, the more your body is actually going to hold on to these toxins, and the more you get good quality foods in, the more your body's kicking them back out and detoxing. So so when you say about fruits and vegetables and things like that, is that kind of the logic there for removing these toxins, almost displacing them naturally?
Correct. Yeah. Basically, I always say we're trying to load their system with a bunch of building blocks. One of my most favorite things to do as well is liver glandular. A lot of patients don't want to eat it, but liver is so extremely nutrient dense. So if they're not going to eat it, we're just going to put it in the capsules and let them swallow it. There's tremendous amounts of things like iron and your B vitamins and vitamin D. So there's all kinds of fantastic qualities in high quality organs.
There's a bit of a movement at the moment, and I actually had a guy on, Dr. Garrett Smith, who talks about how toxic vitamin A is. Is that something that you've looked into? Because that seems to be something that, because you know, you look into how nutritionally dense liver is, and it is, but then the vitamin A in there is insane. I'm on the fence with it. I don't know. I try and eat as naturally as I can. Let's say if I lived in the UK 300 years ago, what would I have access to? And that's kind of the way I try to, you know, it's hard. Sometimes you get a takeaway. Sometimes it's someone's birthday and you go out for dinner. It is what it is. And I try to just move on from that and enjoy it really. But I try to eat as consistently as I can. And I just can't make sense of there would be something in a natural food that is toxic for us. I just struggle with that concept. But then the other side is I do struggle with the idea of force feeding liver every day. You know, like
Yeah.
some people do, like the Liver King. I mean, God, I mean,
Yeah.
that
Right.
that can't end well. I mean, there's got to be a
Yeah.
level.
No, I think you have a great idea about that, Jay. And that's personally how I feel as well. Like, I think we should think, how did our grandpas and grandpas and ancestors do it? How was life like before we had all these convenience foods and ultra processed foods? And you have to think about your native area too. Like, where's your family from? Like, where are your origins from? Like, what are the things that they were doing back then? So you definitely want to think through those things. They always had animals that they ate from nose to tail. So like that's definitely something recently we've gotten away from, where I think the organs are extremely important because most of us go pick up the boneless, skinless chicken breasts at the store.
Yeah.
So we're definitely missing nutrition there. They though ate seasonally. So again, in the summertime, there would be, all these wonderful fruits and a huge harvest and certain things that seasonally now, 365 days a year, we're getting strawberries. Like, you got to think about that as well. Like, what's the real quality of those things? And would you be able to have them year round? Like, there was a season, there was a rhythm to their eating. And I think it's really important to kind of consider all those things, like when we're looking at nutrition and how to feed ourselves.
Yeah. Like I, for one, am very grateful of the supply chain. I'm
Yeah.
very grateful of modern technology, and I'm not one of those that throws the baby out with the bathwater, but I do think that you have to be very mindful. And like eating bananas all through winter in the UK, what is that doing to your circadian rhythm? How is your body processing those sugars? Because it's just such an unnatural, an unnatural thing. And that sort of leads me to like vegetarianism. I think if you're white Northern European and you opt in to become a vegetarian or vegan, I think vegetarian wise, you could probably do a lot better. Although I do know vegans that have been vegan for 10, 15 years, and as far as they're aware, their health is absolutely perfectly fine. My question is how long for, but maybe they'll live forever and live older than me and healthier than me. I don't know. But there is definitely a link between people going vegetarian or vegan and infertility as well. And that sort of begs that question again: what vitamins and minerals should you be focusing on to get the body and the reproductive system and the hormones doing all of the right things?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the time for them, they're depleted in their B vitamins as well as things like iron. They're just not getting things like that from plants. So if they choose to eat that way, you've got to heavily supplement them. So one of my first things I'm always going to give, if I can talk them into it, is an encapsulated form of liver, because there's really just no better way to do it. So if they can like be on par with that, I just personally think the quality of the animal, the life that it had, again, all these things you have to be considerate of. But same for plants. Like if it's all monocropped, industrialized farming, you're missing nutrition that way too.
Yeah. So it's not even necessarily just what you're eating, it's obviously the quality as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I find that because we try to shop as locally as we can, we go to the farmers markets and go to the farm shops. We're quite lucky where we are because we're in a city. It's only newly been crowned a city, but around us is a lot of farm areas as well. So we can go in about 2 or 3 miles and we've got a raw dairy literally on our doorstep. Yeah, and on the way to that dairy, there's a lady that sells loads of veg that she grows herself and loads of eggs from her own chickens. Best eggs I've ever had. I buy trays of them at a time every time I go down there. And what I've actually found is the cost isn't as bad as you think it would be.
Nope.
Especially when you're shopping as locally as that and bulk buying. It's actually not that expensive. I think when you go to the butchers around here, it can be, but if you can find the farmers and you can
Yep.
have those connections, there's definitely deals to be had. So I know people are quite concerned about how much money they spend on food,
Mm-hmm.
but then when you consider just thinking outside the box a little bit and the quality you get,
Yep.
sometimes 3 or 4 times the amount of vitamins and minerals in these foods, and obviously taking out the poisons, the chemicals and sprays and all of this, it just seems like it's just well worth the investment.
Absolutely. I tell patients all the time, like, you should know where your food is coming from. If you can establish those relationships like you have, where you can just have a conversation, they may not be quote unquote certified, organic or things like that, but you can have a dialogue about how they raised their, vegetables. How did they raise their animals? What are they feeding their chickens? And again, you can, like what you mentioned, you can taste the quality difference as well. Like, it's tremendously more nutrient dense. The other nice thing about that is, like, you actually will eat less because it is more nutrient dense. So you're giving your body the fuel that it needs, and it naturally won't need more and more and more because you actually got what you needed in a smaller portion.
Yeah. I wanted to move on from the mold side of things. So the way I've kind of looked at this, because I've gone around all of the houses, I actually started my research on like the body being like basically toxins in the body. I started with mercury because I found out that the vaccine I got all those years ago, it had I think, is it called Thimerosal?
Yeah,
Which is like a,
thimerosal or thimerosal, thimerosal.
yeah, that's it, yeah, and I
Yep,
always forget the name, but it's essentially like a derivative of mercury, right?
correct.
And then I went down the route of mercury. Do you have a lot of experience dealing with mercury?
I have some. I would say it's less common of an issue now, because a lot of the newer vaccines don't contain it. The issue is they replaced it, though, with aluminum now.
Yeah. So yeah, so you learn what each one does, and they all kind of cause similar issues, but mercury will have a, it's mercury would compete with different vitamins, and you can detox it slightly differently. But I think all in all, whether it's mycotoxins from the environment or mercury from tuna or fillings, mercury fillings are a lot less common now as well, which is good. Um, Aluminium, as we call it here in the UK, aluminum is
Yes.
what, yeah. So
Yep.
aluminium here, or cadmium, or lead, or whatever it is. Um, what I've sort of found is similar process in terms of mold, of how to detox it, and that's fix the liver, get the detox pathways moving, and really kind of home into what your actual issue is. You probably have multiple issues. If you've got mold, like I said before, mold can be like the bottom of the glass that's now half full, and then you've had a couple of other things thrown in there. But ultimately, it sort of all kind of links into one, and then you start getting into the conversation of like parasites and
Yep.
candida and yeast and all of these things. Do you come across a lot of patients that have kind of a myriad of all of these things, and it's just putting for fires out? And I'd guess candida and parasites kind of always seem to be there whenever any of the foundational toxins are present in the body as well. That was a bit of a loaded question there. Sorry.
No, you're great. Yeah. No, that's a great point. And something too, like, the more severe the conditions, the more severe the symptoms, I expect to find more than one thing. It's not likely it is just mold. I mean, at that point, yeah, we could be dealing with massive gut infections with candida, with a parasite. Another really common thing when you kind of start to open up, I always say Pandora's box like this, is viruses and viral load. So things like Epstein-Barr virus, as well as other childhood viruses, can reactivate. Again, if your body isn't doing what it needs to do, basically everything just starts kind of to go haywire. And then what comes out and plays, so to speak, that's dependent on every patient. Yeah, if they have a really weak, gut, for example, or really weak immune system, and then that honestly, the first thing that normally happens is it's like the grounds to create that autoimmune response. So I would say that's normally kind of the first big diagnosis that comes, is some type of autoimmune condition, because your body's trying to go after these things, but it's obviously, not winning the battle.
I bet you see a lot of anxiety as well. And
Oh yeah,
high
just
levels of
so much
stress.
anxiety. Yeah, and just again, people that have spent so much time, so much money, and they've gone nowhere. They might have improved like 10%, but their health is still a tremendous mess.
Yeah. I think maybe one of the catch-22s that people have is if they found out that they've been exposed to a toxin and their, say, mercury levels are high, and then they go down a rabbit hole of parasites. It's like, what one do you tackle first? Because the parasites are more prone to be in an environment that's toxic. But, and this is just my view, you could tell me I'm completely wrong, but I believe that they're there, and the likes of candida and these funguses and yeast, etc., almost to try and protect you from the toxins, because they're going to consume these toxins. So do you start killing them off, and then you end up, I don't know, like where do you start with that? How would you look at that, and what would you suggest is like the first thing that you should probably look at if you was in a situation?
That's a great question. I would say, again, it's a little dependent on the patient. If they're having tremendous gut distress, I'm probably starting in the gut first. So if they are having like massive diarrhea and constipation and bloating, maybe some blood in their stool, we're probably going to start in that area, because it's just the one that's screaming the loudest, so to speak. Yeah. If they're not sleeping, if they're getting massive migraines, if they're getting that numbness, that tingly thing that you've talked through, that weakness somewhere, we're probably starting with the liver and just trying to, again, get their body to start to exit some of this stuff and rev up those detoxification pathways.
Yeah. Okay. Would you be, so in terms of the gut, I know that a lot of people say that, the gut is kind of the first place of all illness. All illnesses start in the gut. So I'd imagine in any protocol, if someone's getting headaches, you're also looking at the gut. What are you putting in there? What's the conditions? Maybe doing tests and trying to probably seal the gut. Probably some sort of leaky gut going on as well, right?
Correct. Yeah, gut's a huge deal. 80% of your immune system lives in your gut. Everything processes through there. So if you are not breaking down your food and actually getting it absorbed, like, we could feed you all the good things, but it's not benefiting you in any way, shape, or form. On top of that, if you've got infections or parasites or other things like that, I always say it's definitely a very huge thing that I look at with every single patient, because it does like domino out into a lot of other systems, and it obviously is a big component of people's health.
Yeah. Would you start looking at, you mentioned earlier some binders, chlorella, activated charcoal. One that I've been taking for a while, it's a lot more subtle, is like bentonite clay. Is this a large part of your protocol in general, is look, they start clearing the gut out first, and then, because the gut can heal itself, especially if you're getting the right food in. So would you say first thing, let's clear the gut, get you on some binders, get things moving? If you're not going to the toilet at least once a day, then is that kind of the first thing you'd look at?
Yeah, so we absolutely want to start with motility, because if their gut, 2 to 3 bowel movements a day is what's normal. So if they're going days on end without having a bowel movement, I can't just start pushing stuff through. It has nowhere to go. So that would be very bad, because they would be very miserable very quickly trying to push things out, and they don't have an exit route. On the flip side too, it's like if they have so much diarrhea, just very, very active bowels, we've got to calm that down, because they're missing so much on the nutrient side by just flushing food straight through. So kind of looking at the motility piece first, then we can look at some other pieces like, okay, now that we have good motility, let's go ahead and start to clean some things out. We may want to use a killing herb as well. So if we're dealing with something like a candida infection, we may want to kill that off as well with some natural herbals. So that part is definitely a little dependent on each person and what their testing is looking like.
Yeah. 2 to 3 times a day. I'm a very regular man.
Yes.
Same time every day. And I thought I thought that was really healthy. But are you saying I need to double up?
You're a little slow. Yeah, I would say if you eat at least 2 big meals a day, you gotta have at least 2 bowel movements.
Oh my Lord.
Yep.
Mine's like clockwork. I thought it must have been super healthy. Sometimes it's 2. I don't want to get too much into my bowel movements, but 2 to 3 times. I've heard that before, but that does seem a lot.
Yep. Yeah, so I always say whatever comes in has to go out. So if we're having at least 2 big meals a day, we should have at least 2 bowel movements per day.
Wow. Do you know, just on that thought, actually, when we had mold growing in the house, I used to wake up to go to the toilet a lot, 2, sometimes 3 times.
Yep.
If it was ever a cold day and I had a warm drink, I mean, the missus was at one point like, you need to get this looked at. It was so regular. I was weeing all the time.
Yeah.
Is that a common thing that?
Yeah, it's so through the bowels, that's one huge detoxification pathway. So, your body's trying to activate that to get stuff out. Things also exit through your urinary system, so through your urine, and then also through your skin, so through your sweat. And the lymphatic system. So you've got 3 big pathways, and normally your body is trying to use all 3.
Wow, because I thought that was excessive, and so and I was actually getting a bit worried, but it's completely stopped now as well. It stopped years ago, actually. As soon as we got rid of the active growth of mold, spores are another thing. That was more of a subtle, ongoing thing that we experienced, but. Yeah, that was really chronic. And sorry, I know I'm sort of jumping from one thing to the next, but I can tell that, when I looked through your website earlier, you've got such a wealth of knowledge. I just want to kind of get into each part. You mentioned about with mold exposure, the eyes. That's another thing. I used to get this thing. I went and had multiple eye tests at the time. It was like I just couldn't concentrate my vision. So I'd look this way and it's just sort of like that. That happened a lot. And when I'm looking at the screens, my eyes they weren't having it at all.
Yeah.
Constantly strained. And again, once I removed the actual growth of it in the house, ours was only a small amount and I had such obvious signs at the time. But yeah, the vision was a nightmare for me. I was thinking, am I long-sighted or short-sighted? I don't know. But and certain lights as well. If I went in like a supermarket, the lighting in there, I just couldn't concentrate. It was such a strange experience. Again, completely gone. But if I didn't go down the rabbit hole that I went down, I could have been getting all sorts of prescriptions and probably capitulating in my mind, thinking, "Oh my God, until you sort of stumble across this information, you could be just going around the houses with it."
Yeah. And so I've had a lot of people describe exactly what you did. Blue light screens. So the blue light from computers. I had one gal that, we had to get her a screen cover. We had to get her the actual tinted glasses. Because for her, it would trigger up a migraine to the point where she could barely work. It was so bad.
Yeah, I bought the blue blockers in the end.
Yep.
And I because this is the thing, the mold thing, like I said, it was quite subtle. When we had experts come round, there was no serious issues, which was lucky. So it was only a small amount. But I'd imagine mold's everywhere, probably in your office block, in the supermarket, when you go out shopping in the shops, in your car maybe. So you're probably just getting micro doses all the time. And just a little bit extra in your home, because most people have probably got some level of mold spores, but just that little bit that tops the scales can just throw you over the edge. And it was how extreme it felt at the time. And then you come across stories of people that had ripping up floorboards and the whole flooring's completely
Yeah.
mold. I mean, I
It's
just
oh,
dread to,
yeah.
I dread to
It's
think kind of what
devastating.
state.
It's so devastating to people's health. Like, I had one gal that was having almost like it looked like a seizure. I mean, that was like how severe it was when she went into these like attacks.
Yeah. The other thing as well, there's definitely something along um, like the placebo, right? So psychological aspects. So if you believe something can be bad, then the chances are it's going to be worse for you, right? But with
Yeah,
mold, it tends to be a silent thing. Most people don't
correct.
even know about it, and it's wreaking havoc.
No, no, and I think it takes doing like a quiz online or, starting to learn, like getting into a mold community, and I tell patients that, because they can go and get a lot of anxiety being like, oh my gosh, I have every single one of these things. And I just tell them, I'm like, it's okay. Like, you're in the right place. Like, it's good that you're realizing that these things are all linked together and they start to make sense of what internally has been their battle for oftentimes years.
Yeah. Oh my God. And then you look at like mold in the food. That's
Hmm.
another thing.
Yep.
I'm less worried about that, in all honesty. I certainly avoid peanuts and peanut butter now.
Yep.
But you know, when it gets to like your coffee, ideally have it mold free, mold tested. But I'm less, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm less concerned about that than I am living in a moldy environment where I can clearly see, or at work if I see, there's some mold and I need to figure out what I'm going to do to avoid that. Would you
Yep.
be too, when people have had exposure, are you to the level of, look, you need to check your food, you need to cut out certain foods?
I just let them know, if they're, for example, a coffee drinker, coffee historically has mold. So
Yeah.
if you want to continue to enjoy coffee and you have all these symptoms going on, we need to clean that up right out of the gate. Just because their cup of stuff is already overflowing, like, we don't want to make that worse. So it's all about kind of emptying that, giving them that bandwidth back, and if they have a worse day, for example, all of a sudden, like out of the blue, I'm normally going to jump to something like food or like coffee. It's not my biggest concern, but if things, again, are getting a little worse and they're kind of going down that road of better days, and then all of a sudden they kind of backtrack and backslide, we might want to look into that.
What do you know of any signs of moldy coffee beans? Like maybe, when you have a cup of coffee and you're like jittering, is that normally a
Yeah.
sign? Is there anything that you've sort of picked up over the years?
I mean, I think a lot of it is how you feel after you eat it. The problem is most people aren't in tune enough to even pick that up. Those that have had mold exposure, you're definitely, I always say, a really good barometer. So like, you most likely, because you've had mold exposure, could probably pick that up because it'll bring like a very low level back of some of the stuff you felt.
Yeah.
But it could also take more cups, it could be several days worth before you kind of start to pick up on something like that.
Yeah. I have a mold related story for you, right? So when we cleared our house up, this was before the remediation guys come round. This was a few years ago. We went down to Cornwall to spend I think it was like a week. We house sitted my wife's cousin's house, and he built his own house. It's a brand new house, and we've gone in there, and I've started feeling all of these weird things again. A
Hmm.
bit tingly in the leg. I felt a bit almost like blood pressure was or blood sugar was weird. So I feel a little bit lightheaded and a bit sort of drained, bit of anxiety. These are kind of the early signs for me. The vision, that was becoming a thing.
Hmm.
And I realized that in their bathroom, it was just riddled all around the windowsills and all sorts. So this was when I was doing a bit of research, but I didn't know as much as I do now after, these years. And I was like, oh my God, we're here for a week. We've said we're going to house sit. It was winter, so we're just going
Yeah.
to open the windows, do the best we can.
Yeah.
And we then went round the wife's mum's house, and she's had a massive mold problem. And we're sat in there, and within about half an hour, I'm like, I need to get out of this house.
Yep.
All of these symptoms on absolute steroids. And I've
Hmm.
walked out, About half an hour later, I'm feeling fine again. And it's almost like something's just drained all, like my blood sugar level is just on the ground. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm going pale. I'm feeling weird. My heart's racing, anxiety. I'm in my own head. So we've gone out. We're near the sea, so nice fresh air and all of this. Gone back to the house. It's come back again, but not as bad. Anyway, the last night that we stayed there, we went out and had a couple of drinks, and I ended up absolutely sick as a dog all night, vomiting,
Yeah.
just chronic. And I ate some fish that day, some fresh fish, and I was looking into the connection of of eating certain fish and mold exposure. And
Mm-hmm.
I've obviously had some crazy reaction, and I'm like, like when you have a sickness bug,
Yep.
it's just constant all night, just
Yeah.
completely.
The body's like, get out.
Yeah, and I'm panicking at this point. I'm like, oh my God, this was like a whole night of it. And I've called, we have 111 here, which is like a telephone service for like doctors
Mm-hmm.
or health professionals. And I've called them and I've sort of explained it because it wouldn't stop. And it was getting to the point where I was drained and I just felt horrible. And I said to the wife, it was the last day at this point, I said, we need to go. Like, they're getting home in like 5 hours. We were going to wait to see him, but I need to go. I need to go home. I've had enough. I want to go home. And I'm like halfway home, 6 hour drive. I'm halfway home and the doctor's called me. We need you to come to the local thing. I'm like, mate, I'm 3 hours away. Like,
Yeah.
it took it took so long to bloody call. And as I'm driving home, I'm just progressively getting better. And I've got back home, I've eaten, and I just felt absolutely fine again. So I don't know if that's linked, but the reason I bring that up is you said someone like me who's had this exposure. I think I'm like a radar for it. If there's mold, I can sense it, and to the level that it is, maybe I had food poisoning. It was something I ate that made me sick. But to have those symptoms on and off over that period, and then have such an aggressive reaction, which then ended on my way home, I just
Mm-hmm.
thought it seemed a little bit of a coincidence there.
Yeah. No, I think that's completely true. Like I had one gal who had mold exposure when she lived in Alaska. She had moved to Texas to get out of it. So back to her parents' home, they moved the whole family there. And then she's the one that found it in her car floorboards, like in her mats, her car mats. Because very similar to you, everything had gone away. She was feeling so much better. And then she got this new to her car and couldn't figure out why she felt so terrible every time she was driving around town, like going grocery shopping, going to the bank, going to work. And then for whatever reason, she decided to like lift up her floor mats and they were full of mold.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
like a revisit of a lot of her symptoms. But as soon as she figured that out, like you, got everything out, cleaned up the car, she was fine after that.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you another question, and this is becoming a bit of a theme in terms of people that I've spoken to. I interviewed, I don't know if you've ever heard of her, Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote the book, The GAPS Diet.
Yeah.
And even she had, I mean, she's actually a neuroscientist. So
Yep.
guess that's sort of where probably she got some of that information from. But she had a really good insight on this as well. And it seems to be a bit of a theme going on, but that is the psychological aspects of things. So things like stress, but stress doesn't have to be someone's cut you up in the car and now you're stressed, or you got, bills to pay and you're stressed. More like an underlying subconscious level of continuous stress,
Mm-hmm.
or childhood traumas. That's another one. Or expectations that you have of yourself or others have of you, maybe. It comes in all shapes and sizes as well. Do you see a lot in your clinic of where psychological aspects have caused, different levels of like chronic illnesses?
100%. So for us, we always call it the three T's. We call these guys the three big triggers that you can create, bad health with. The first is some type of like physical trauma. So, you fall off a curb, get into a car accident. So that's the first T. The second T is toxins. So anything outside in, anything like what we've been talking through today, like mold. And then the third T is thoughts. So again, that all three of those can dramatically impact your health. And you can't discount any of those things. You really got to understand all those things to really help someone rebuild their health.
Yeah, and you could have, as we've said a few times in this interview, you can have, well, people who are toxic but have chronic anxiety.
Correct.
And then with anxiety probably comes a level of like self-punishment, and then it's never-ending loop of like, you know, dread and guilt and shame, and you know, and then, you know, potentially that's where it comes back around and becomes a physical symptom off of the back of what was already a physical situation, you know. So it just seems to kind of loop itself.
Yeah, you initially, when we start to get patients under care, like a lot of what we're doing is just breaking those cycles so that they stop happening. And you know, aren't with that type of scenario necessarily, there is no herb for that. There is no, like, we got to really decide, okay, how are we going to help this person break this issue? It might be that they need to go for walks or meditate or go to yoga. You know, maybe nothing that, you know, clinically I can like just give to them. Like, we got to figure that out for their individual needs.
Yeah. Sometimes I think just the awareness of your mind doing those things, and also the awareness of how your mind can actually create those things. I don't think a lot of people know how powerful the mind actually is.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I always tell them, in my opinion, that last one, the thought one, is the worst out of the bunch, because you can dismantle your health so quickly just with your thoughts.
Yeah, I think as well, a high enough level of stress can stop the detox process.
Oh yeah, 100%. I always say, if you think you're running from a bear, literally or figuratively, like, it doesn't matter. Like, your body interprets that the same way.
So here's a question for you, and this, I think, is probably a problem that most people will experience, and you've probably seen it 1,000 times. Somebody has some sort of health issue. They then look at what could cause it, whether it's mercury or aluminium in their environment, or mold, and they live in a moldy house, but they own the house, and then they look at the remediation cost, and then it creates this fear. So now it's good that you're isolating the issue. We believe that this is kind of the main issue, but you can't always fix it straight away. And if they need to go on a detox, it's going to take time. And now maybe they're concerned that they have toxins in their body. So I'd imagine that could create, I know it did for me as well. It created this loop of fear and guilt as well, because you punish yourself. How did I let this happen? How didn't I know? How was I so naive? Why did I take those COVID solutions, you know, which I've spoken a lot about on this show. You've got to be careful what you say, of course. You don't want to get kicked off of your platforms. But people that have, say, had those and now realise how toxic they could be.
They're so bad for people's health, unfortunately.
Yeah. So what do you advise someone that comes across this realisation, whether it is the COVID solution or whether it is the mold or whether it is eating 3 tins of tuna a week over 10 years and now they've realised that they've got mercury poisoning? How do you coach someone through that without them kind of going on a negative spiral?
Yeah, I always say, like, the key is just to start, you know, whatever that starting place is. You know, the first thing is, if you're able to recognize where the issue is coming from, okay, great. We've already identified the problem, whether that's the house or the tuna or whatever those things are. That's still valuable, even if we can't 100% tackle everything all at once. Like, at least we know where it's coming from so that we can stop it. So that's so helpful. And then I just let them know, like, again, we're going to do this as a marathon. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. No one heals overnight. Everybody wants it, you know, in 2 days, like Amazon Prime. It doesn't work like that. Like, truly, it's a process. And that takes time and energy and effort. But I always remind them, like, what would it look like if you walked out of my office with nothing going on, with your body fully restored? Like, what's that worth to you? And most of the time, it's a pretty emotional thought of like, what would my life look like if my health was fully restored, if I felt amazing and I popped out of bed and I got to go to work and felt great every day. And I'm just like, it's worth fighting for, you know? So yeah, I mean, I'm part coach, part doc. Like, we got to take them through the process. There's hard days in this, you know, not every day is a good up day. You know, they're going to have ups and downs as they go through that healing process. But I always remind them it's always worth it in the end.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. I don't have clients like you do. So the conversations I have in my day to day are quite different. But the sort of conversations I have is about removing toxins from a preventative measure, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, stop using a microwave. That's like that's up there. Fix your water, you know, you drink more than you eat. So tackle that one first. Your air environment, you know, you breathe in more than you drink. So that's probably your number one. And I kind of go through it that way. But when people ask me questions, because I'll just kind of overload with information, they're like, oh, well, I might as well never eat again then. And because it is so overwhelming. So the way I tried to look at it and the way I looked at it for myself because I had all these panicky situations when I realized, oh my God, I thought that was healthy. And all these years, it's actually not. It's the little things you do every day that make you sick. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the little changes you do every day that accumulate to make you well. So the way I looked at it is, don't do anything too extreme to start with. Just start with the little things. Cut out plastic, you know, avoid plastic. Buy a water distiller or a water purifier. And now you know you've got clean water. You can sleep on that one because you can do that in autopilot. You've ticked off that box. And then I got into air fryers and I was cooking in the metal. I didn't even realize this was a few years ago. And I started looking into what's, you know, the toxins that's in the metal in the air fryer. I know. So then I threw that out and I bought a different one where I can use glass trays.
Yeah, you know, they have different kinds now. Yeah, it's just like you try to make a change that you think is helpful and then it's not. But I always just tell everybody, again, it's little by little. Like, you're choosing to build your health day by day, you know, because it can be kind of frustrating and overwhelming, but you got to start somewhere. Like, you just got to start.
Yeah, just start with the easiest thing, the thing you know, that will make the biggest difference. And I do think as well, you don't realize this at the beginning, but everything you tackle and you learn, you remember. So now you've got that knowledge. Now you go on to the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. And before you know it, you're doing 10 things that just by living are helping towards good health as opposed to taking you down to bad health. So that's kind of the way I've looked at it. And I'd imagine that's similar to you, because if I'm just dealing with normal people. You're dealing with people who have come to you because they're unwell. So you've probably got to be a lot more thoughtful and caring in the approach of telling them, yeah, kind of everything you're doing, we need to change.
Yeah. But these are all conversations we have with our patients. Like, right out of the gates, I'm like, what kind of water are you drinking? Like, again, I can give you all the good things to build you back up. But if we're totally putting one foot in the hole every morning, you know, and every single day, we have an issue there too.
Wow. Is there anything else you wanted to cover in particular, or seems like quite a good place to?
I think we're good. I just want to thank you. I'm so thankful to hear that there's people all across the world, you know, that are so passionate like I am about just educating people, like how to create good health, how to like build your health, your family's health, and, you know, just spreading the word. So just thank you for reaching out. I truly appreciate this. And I'm always excited to share, you know, what I have through my knowledge as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I'll share all of your links on the podcast so people can find you. Is there anything that you're up to that you wanted to specifically shout out, any events, or have you got anything that you wanted to promote at all, or?
I would just say we are currently taking new patients. So I just hired a third doctor. So we're really, really excited. We just opened up our new office. So we're ready to serve more and more patients. So that's the biggest thing. Our grand opening is actually today for our new space. But we're really just truly passionate about helping all those that need that shift, that need that hope, that need those answers. So we're really excited about that, and the more people that we'll be able to serve by adding more staff.
Perfect. Excellent. Yeah, I think people like yourself are going to get bigger, because more and more people, I think, are waking up to, you know, what's going on in the world, especially with the whole situation over the last 3 or 4 years. I think people are starting to ask questions, and maybe not blindly trusting authority as they have, you know, in the past. So I think it's becoming a bigger market for people like you, and if you keep doing what you're doing, I think, yeah, they'll find you. I'm sure, I'd imagine you're getting busier over the last, you know, couple of years at least.
We have.
Yeah,
we've grown. I mean, I would say, as crappy as COVID was for so many people, it was a blessing in the fact that, like, people really woke up to the fact they needed to work on their health, and it was their job themselves to work on their own health. So in that aspect, we've gotten busier. The sad thing, though, is people are getting sicker and sicker. So they got to wake up and do something about it. That's what's key.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I so appreciate this.
Yeah, brilliant.
Reach out if you ever want to connect in the future. We're always happy to do this.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much.
Cool. All right.